So today we're going to finish the capital structure theories, and then in the second part we're going to talk about capital structure in practice, what we see in real world. If you remember, last time we talked about trade-off theory. We talked about Modigliani and Miller. Do you remember what Modigliani and Miller say when we are in a world where we don't have any bankruptcy and we don't have any taxes? Yes?
Capital structure is irrelevant.
Yes, so basically they say if we live in a world where we don't have any tax or we don't have any bankruptcy costs, then it doesn't matter what kind of capital structure you have. It doesn't matter whether you use debt or equity or what kind of debt and what kind of equity. These are all irrelevant. Why? Remember their pie reference. They say you have the same pie as long as the capital structure doesn't change the cash flows. How you slice the pie doesn't matter. The value of the firm, the bigness of the pie will stay constant. So you cannot change the value of the firm, and you cannot change the weighted average cost of capital in a world we don't have any bankruptcy and tax. Then we said, okay, wait a minute, this is not very realistic. So we introduced taxes to the picture. And what did we see when we introduced taxes? We saw two things, which are on the slides here. One, according to proposition 1, it says you can increase the firm value as much as needed by taking on more debt. Why? Because of the tax advantage. When you have more debt, you pay less tax to the government. The second proposition says you can decrease weighted average cost of capital of the firm by increasing, did I say decrease? You can decrease cost of capital of the firm by increasing your leverage. So this is proposition 1, this is proposition 2. Okay, so basically, according to this, optimal capital structure will be what?
100% debt.
100% debt. So the question is, have you found a money machine? So by increasing your debts more and more, can you increase the value of the firm? So basically, in this world we introduced, the answer is yes, but in real world, the answer is no. Why? The government is not stupid. Just because of the tax advantage, you pay less tax to the government. So government will be aware of it. So there will be more complex corporate and personal tax systems. And the second thing is, yeah, we talk about advantage of that, but there are costs of that like bankruptcy, like agency costs. Okay, so now we're going to introduce bankruptcy to the picture. So we are moving to a more realistic world, as you can see. I'm not going to focus on the changes in personal taxes. Just focus on corporate taxes and bankruptcy in this world. Okay, let's remember advantages of that first, and then I will talk about disadvantages of that. If you remember the slides from last week, and of course you don't, we talk about two main advantages of that. One was debt reduces agency costs. How? If a company has some debt, then the manager will be more, let's say, more aware of what investors need. And instead of spending the company cash the way he wants, he will be spending money more structured. What do I mean by that? If a company has lots of cash, then the manager will not know what to do with it. And we know that CEOs have kind of empire builder incentives. So they want to govern like very big firms because of the reputation. And another thing is they like spending on luxury stuff. So they buy the most expensive office furniture, office desks and stuff. They use the private jets of the company. They use company money to buy Italian tailor-made suits. They even throw birthday parties for their wives using the company money. And this was a scandal of, I think, last week. So a couple of S&P 500 firm CEOs spend money for their personal benefits. This came to the picture, and I think they had to resign. So if a company has some debt, they cannot spend the company money like crazy because they have to pay off the debt. Because if they don't pay off the debt, their company will be in bankruptcy. So as you can see, there will be more monitoring if the company has some debt. The other thing, advantage of debt is tax shield. We talk about it. After tax cost of debt is way lower than any kind of financing. So these are the good things about that. But now we're going to start talking about bad things related to debt. One, if you have lots of debt, you have lack of financial flexibility. So you cannot spend the money as much as the way you want. And that will create a problem. Actually, today, in the second part, I will talk a lot about why financial flexibility is very, very important for companies. The second thing is it increases agency cost. So in the previous slide, I said it decreases agency cost. Now I'm saying it increases agency cost. Well, I'm not that old. I'm aware of what I said. I'm not saying anything conflicting, actually. When I say agency cost in this slide, I'm talking about the agency cost between debt holders and shareholders, or debt holders and the CEO. What it means is if a manager has lots of debt, there might be agency costs related to those, and having that is a bad thing in that world. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples just in like 10, 15 seconds. The last thing that we are well aware of related to debt is if you have lots of debt, you have lots of bankruptcy costs or bankruptcy probability, which is a bad thing. So now can you understand why this Modiglia and Miller theory is also called trade-off theory? So there's trade-off of having lots of debt. It has advantages, it has disadvantages. Okay. Now let's talk about a couple of owner and lender agency problems. When I say owner, I'm talking about shareholders. As shareholders, we own the company, and the manager works for us. Okay, that's the assumption. So manager will protect shareholders' benefits, basically. Okay, so we know that debt has senior claim on cash flows. So if there's any cash flows generated, debt holders get paid first, and then equity holders. In a world, in this case, we know that what the money shareholders can make is limitless. If the stock price increases like crazy, then as shareholders, we will get lots of money. And the downside is only the investment we put on the stock. But for debt holders, what is the upside potential? You just get your money back with some interest. And downside potential, bankruptcy. Okay? So as you can see, debt holders have more stake at the firm in a world with agency problems. So what's going to happen here is shareholders will be okay with more riskier projects, much riskier projects. But debt holders will not like it because risk means the company can lose money. And if the company loses money, then debt holders will not get paid. Another example is dividend payments. Shareholders love dividend payments, but debt holders will say, hey, why are you spending the money on dividends? Just keep the money in the company so that I can get my money back. So that might be another problem. And to combat all of those problems, debt holders are, of course, they're not stupid. What they do is they take precautions. What can they do? Think about banks thinking that the CEO might be acting against their incentives. What kind of stuff banks can do to protect themselves?
They can take collateral.
Okay, very good. They can ask for collaterals. Perfect. So if you cannot pay the money back, I'm going to take your factory, for instance. Yes?
They can ask for the final right to say which project to select.
That's also very good. They can actually do that. I mean, when you look at covenants, do you remember what covenants were? So basically, with the bank and the company, you're going to have an agreement. And in those agreements, you're going to have covenants. Covenants are really interesting because some of them are very common covenants, like very positive covenants. Like they say, use this accounting rule, just timely report your financial statements, very straightforward stuff. Like all companies should do that anyway. There might be negative covenants which say, okay, your current ratio cannot be below this number. Your net worth ratio should be this number. Your debt ratio should be this number. And these are really binding. Or they can say, you can only spend $500,000 on capital expenditure this quarter. That's it. So they can even limit how much money the manager will spend on capital expenditure. One problem with that is who has more information about the investments? The company or the bank? Company, of course. So CEOs might be taking risky projects even if banks are not aware of it, actually. So we see covenants. Another thing is if a bank thinks that a CEO will act against their incentives, then they might make the debt more expensive. How can they make debt more expensive? Thank you. Interest rate. They can put a high interest rate on the debt. So as you can see, these are all agency conflicts, and groups are doing their best to protect their own incentives, actually. So as you can see, there are agency costs related to debt, and the actions taken by the debt holders might make debt more expensive. So let's look at individual examples of it. One is about risks. So I said shareholders are okay with risk, debt holders don't like risk. I always give the same example. FedEx was in trouble. The company had, I think, like $25,000. The owner of the CEO took that $25,000. He went to Las Vegas, gambled, made lots of money. So it was the very risky action, which was very bad for debt holders. He got lucky. Shareholders were okay with it because, I mean, they're okay with risk. And that strategy worked. Not all the time the strategy will work, so I'm not encouraging any gambling behavior. He just got lucky in that example, okay? But let's look at this example. I have this example in my corporate finance class, so it's familiar to most of you. Here I have this company XYZ, a very creative name, I know. They borrow $100 at 10%. And this company can invest in one of the two projects that each cost $100. Project A returns $111 with certainty, and Project B returns $90 with 50% probability and $115 with 50% probability. So we have Project A and Project B. Project A returns $111 to investors for sure. And Project B either returns 90 or 115, and these are with 50% probabilities. Okay, so which one is riskier? Which project? Second one. Which project do debt holders prefer? A. Why? How much money debt holders will get if the company takes Project A? 110, 100 the capital plus 10 interest. And how much equity holders will get? The remaining, senior claim on money. In this case, there are two cases. If the project returns only 90, how much money debt holders will get? Huh? Yes, only 90. And equity holders will get? A big zero. And in the other case, if the project returns 115, how much debt holders will get? 110, and the remaining part will go to equity holders. Okay, so for equity holders, which project is better, A or B? B. Why? Their expected return is 2.5. How do you calculate expected return? It's really expected return. So with 50% chance they're going to get 0. With 50% chance they're going to get 5. So their expected return is 2.5 here. And for this, it's 1. So in this case, we know that debt holders are going to go with Project A because they're definitely getting their money back. No uncertainty, no risk. For shareholders, there's some risk, but upside potential is good. So they're going to go with Project B. Okay? So this is one example of risk-taking behavior. I have another example. This is from one of your books. here we have two projects. One is low risk, the other one is high risk. 50%, in both cases, you have 50% chance of having a recession, 50% chance of having a boom market. So if recession happens, low risk project will bring you $100. In the boom case, it's going to bring 200. And here, oh, I forgot, you got $100 from debt holders. I forgot to say that. So here, debt holders are not getting, debt holders are getting $100 in the recession case, and equity holders will not have any money left. Here, in the boom case, again, debt holders are getting $100, and equity holders will get the remaining 100. In the high-risk project, in the boom market, you're getting a lot of value, 240. In recession, the value of the firm is really small. So in the recession case, debt holders will get all the money, equity holders will not get any money. And in boom market, debt holders are getting that their $100 back, the remaining money, 140, goes to equity holders. Lots of talk. Okay, now I have questions. Which projects returns more to equity holders? How did you calculate it? Give me numbers. The idea is same with here.
The expected return in the high-risk project is 70, and the low risk is 60.
You're again calculating expected return in each case. So here you're either getting 0 or 100. So expected return is 50, right? 0 or 100. Multiply the probabilities, add them up. Okay, you get 50. In the high-risk project, you get 0 or 140. Add them up, divide them by 2, you get 70. So equity holders get more in project B, which is high risk. But my question is, which project has higher NPV? Huh? So let's try to link risk to NPV as well. Who says first one? Who else says first one? Is there anyone who says the high risk one? Oh, no, this country. We are always like at time 0, let's say. Okay, it should be A. Why? The value of the firm is, again, just like you calculated expected return to equity holders, you calculate the value of the firm, you add them up, divide them by 2. So you have 150 value in the low risk project case. Here you have 290 over 2, which is 145, right? When you have high risk project. So important thing is the intuition. Even if A has more NPV, shareholders will still go with the high risk one because their return can be higher. So I know it's kind of doesn't make sense because shareholders are okay with low NPV. They're okay with low NPV, but they just care about their return. Since they're okay with risk, they're going to go with high-risk project, even if low-risk project has high NPV. Debt holders case, it's very straightforward. Debt holders will want low risk, of course. Okay. So this is one example of agency cost, which is risk shifting, risk taking, and as you can see, shareholders like risk, debt holders don't like risk. Okay. Another example is underinvestment. So that's another huge issue. So suppose that the firm has $4,000 debt, and there's a project. It brings $1,700 to the firm, and cost is $1,000, and all the costs will be paid by equity holders. So equity is used to finance the project. This is a positive NPV project. Okay, we don't have any problems with the value creation. So again, we have two cases, with and without the project. As you can see, in each case, the cash flow of the firm will increase by the value of the project, which is 700. So in the boom market, you're getting 5,000 without the project. With project, it's going to be 67,000, increased by the value of the project. For recession, it's either 2,400 or in recession, it's 2,400 without the project. With the project, it's going to be 4,100. So in the boom case, debt holders will get all $4,000. In recession case, they're only getting part of their investment. And it is the case without the project. With the project, they're definitely getting their money back. Another thing is what stockholders do. Try to be awake here because I'm going to ask you the question. So in the boom market, without the project, stockholders get 1,000. In recession, they're not getting any money because they don't have the senior claim on cash. In the boom market with the project, they're getting 2,700. In recession, they're getting 100. Okay. So question. Do I have the question here? Okay. What is the expected return to shareholders in each case? This part is easy. So without the project, how much money will be returned to shareholders? Again, equal probability of boom and recession. 500. With the project, it's going to bring 1,400. What is the cost of the project? 1,000. And shareholders will pay for it, right? So in this case, do you think shareholders will go ahead with the investment or not? Huh? Okay. If they take the investment, the return to shareholders will be 1,400. But the cost is 1,000, and it will be paid by shareholders. So the real return will be what? 400. So without the project, the return is 500. With the project, it's going to be 400 because of the cost. So do you think shareholders will go with the project? No. Even if it's a positive NPV project, just because shareholders are paying for this project, they're going to say no. They're going to say, we don't care about, again, value creation. There's more money. We are paying for the project. So that's a bad thing, and they will go without the project. Do you see the agency conflict here? With the project, debt holders are definitely getting their money back, but shareholders don't care about it. Yes?
With the project, isn't the company's value increase?
Yes.
So isn't this a good thing for equity holders?
No, but because just focus on how much shareholders are getting in each case. Huh?
For the dividends.
It's not even if we don't have any dividends, it doesn't matter because the total value of the firm goes to shareholders and debt holders. So with the project, debt holders are getting more. They're getting their money back for sure. So actually, the value increase is good for debt holders. But our greedy shareholders will say, I don't care whether they're getting their money back. I don't care whether the value of the firm increased. My slice is getting smaller. So they're not going to like it. So that's an underinvestment problem. Why it's underinvestment? Because you're not taking positive NPV projects. That's the second problem. The third one is something we talk all the time. You can think about dividends. And if dividends are paid to shareholders, shareholders are happy, bondholders are not because debt holders want cash in the company. So this is probably the most straightforward form of agency conflict. So these are all conflicts of interest we can see between debt holders and shareholders. And what effect does this have on capital structure is the question we have. We're going to see debt holders are aware of these problems. Shareholders are aware of this problem. Both of them will work for themselves. But since bondholders are aware of those problems, they're going to make that more expensive, and they're going to put binding conditions in the covenants. And this is going to be something bad for companies because they will have less financial flexibility. Okay. Now let's move to the bankruptcy case, which was another problem of debt, which was another very important problem of debt. So what is bankruptcy? If a firm cannot meet its financial obligations, it's bankruptcy. You know what bonds are? Bonds make coupon payments every quarter. If a bond skips a coupon payment, then actually, in theory, the company will be in bankrupt. So it's pretty serious. But companies kind of have choices between types of bankruptcy, let's say. This is, of course, US system. There's Chapter 7 and Chapter 11. Chapter 7 is the end of the company, basically, the termination of the firm. So all the assets are sold at a salvage value. And whatever is made, whatever money is made, it is returned to debt holders and then shareholders. Or there's Chapter 11, which is reorganization. It is the option of keeping the company at a going concern. And in this case, they're actually recapitalizing debt, restructuring the company. So, of course, management will want reorganization, even if creditors will go after Chapter 7 because it's easier for them. Sometimes after huge negotiations, we might see companies going to experiencing Chapter 11. Why is it such a big deal for creditors to deal with Chapter 11, you think? Why is it so difficult for them that a company is trying to recapitalize the debt? Can you think of anything?
Because I feel like if the company is in a situation where it goes like bankruptcy, then like banks have to like apply so much more like interest than they used to apply. And that like sort of interest might be unbearable for the company. So it might have no use in the future for the company.
That's one thing. Of course, interest rate payments will be higher because the company is in trouble. Another thing is actually very common and very straightforward thing is, do you think a company has one debt holder? They have many, like tens of different debt holders. So it is the reorganization also means just talking to each of the creditor and work on your debt, which is very time consuming for all kinds of debt holders. So in general, for liquidation is easier for creditors because they don't have to consume time and effort and energy on it. Okay, so this is the general idea of bankruptcy. And when I say bankruptcy cost of debt, I'm talking about two things. Expected bankruptcy cost will be calculated by using probability of bankruptcy and cost of bankruptcy, okay? Of course, the greater the bankruptcy cost and the probability of bankruptcy means that the less debt a company can afford, of course. And we're going to talk more about it in a second. So what kind of companies will have more probability of, higher probability of bankruptcy? So basically, bankruptcy is all about whether you will have enough cash to pay off your debts. And some companies will have high probability of bankruptcy. And the most important item for probability of bankruptcy is probably the cash flow, right? Because it's all about whether cash flows will be enough to cover your debt. So there are two important things about cash flow: the level of cash flow and the variability of cash flow. So if a company has huge amounts of cash, do you think this company will have high or low probability of bankruptcy? Low, because their cash will be enough to cover the debt. How about the variability? A company has very stable cash flows. Do you think that company will have high or low probability of bankruptcy? Low. There's less risk. For a company, cash flows going up and down like this, in some cases, in some periods, the company will not be able to pay off the debt. In some periods, it will have lots of cash. So stable cash flow means less probability of bankruptcy. Very straightforward. Okay, dollar cost of bankruptcy. There are two kinds of cost of bankruptcy: direct cost and indirect cost. And let's see what they are. When I say direct cost, I'm talking about legal and administrative costs, all the professional services the company had to undertake. I have examples from very old academic studies. Warner, for instance, in 1977, showed that bankruptcy direct costs are around 5% of the assets at the time of the bankruptcy. Weiss, in 1989, he showed that the bankruptcy costs are 3% of the book value of assets or 20% of the equity value of the company. More direct evidence or new evidence is between 2003 and 2005. US firms paid 8.6 million per month for legal and professional services. So I guess it pays a lot to be a bankruptcy lawyer, right? They're getting lots of money. So these are the direct costs, and I'm going to show you more examples on it. But let's talk about indirect costs related to bankruptcy. So it might be anything indirectly related to bankruptcy, like lost sales. When you know that a company is in trouble, do you buy more of their item or less of their item? I'm not talking about like those discount stores which says, oh, we are going bankrupt, so we are selling everything we have. I'm talking about like big corporations. So they're going to lose their sales, of course. And there will be a change in supplier behavior. So maybe previously, when you don't have any bankruptcy problems, suppliers will be like, oh, just get those supplies from me. You're going to pay in 2 months. But when they know that you're close to bankruptcy, they're going to say, no, I want the payment up front. Another thing is there will be more difficult obtaining new capital. When banks know that you're in trouble, they're not going to give you lots of debt as expected. And all of those things I talk about is not just valid for bankrupt firms, but also firms in financial distress. So financial distress happens way before bankruptcy. And sometimes companies hit financial distress, recover from it later. If they can't, they're going to go bankrupt. Okay, let's look at this, I think, very interesting case of Lehman. You know, Lehman scandal, bankruptcy, it was huge. Okay, I know there are lots of words, but I will do the reading. So Lehman Brothers, which set a record as the largest company to file for bankruptcy protection, is on course to yield one of the biggest bonanzas for lawyers. New York-based Weil Gotshal Manges LLP earlier this week asked a federal bankruptcy judge in New York to sign off on a $55 million payment for its work represented Lehman. So basically, let's just read this part, because this is all blah, blah, blah. The lead lawyer is claiming 759 hours of work at $950 per hour. $950 per hour for the 3-month period. That means he claims he worked the equivalent of 7 days a week, 8.3 hours a day for the entire 90 days. So he worked a lot. So as you can see, when companies are in bankrupt, it's almost like beating the dead horse, kind of. Like you also kick the bankrupt firm as much as you can do. And Enron spent total cost of $750 million on legal and accounting fees. So in bankrupt, this is an evidence of direct costs, which might be huge, as you can see. Okay, let's look at the indirect costs a little bit. And the indirect cost of capital are higher for some kind of firms. And I have some examples of it here. Is the door closed? Could you close the door? Thank you. Okay. So if a company is producing long-life durable goods that require replacement parts, indirect cost of bankruptcy will be higher for them. Why? Because replacement is necessary, and if customers think that the company will not be able to make the replacement, then it's going to affect their sales even more. So indirect cost of bankruptcy will be high for those kind of companies. Another thing is goods and services for which quality is an important attribute. For those companies, bankruptcy costs will be higher, like airline companies. Airline companies go bankrupt all the time. And I remember when my final year of US, American Airlines was in bankrupt. And I actually kept on flying with the American Airlines because I'm a Turk. No, because I like American Airlines. But you know, Delta was in trouble. United Airlines was in trouble. They go bankrupt all the time. And normally, when an airline company is going bankrupt, you stay away from them, right? So that's another thing. Another type of company that will have high cost of bankruptcy is if the company value depends on complementary products supplied by other companies. So if you're in trouble, it's going to affect the other company as well. So overall, it might affect the indirect cost of bankruptcy more for your case. Like Apple or Windows, which one will be influenced more by bankruptcy, you think? Which one uses more complementary products? Huh? Okay, which says complementary products, so you should buy them together. Oh, it depends, right? Apple and Mac, like iPhones and Mac, it's all Apple stuff. But Microsoft is using with different kinds of firms, not just like Apple. So in that case, which one might be more affected? Windows might be affected more. Okay, the last one is products that require continuous service and support. Like Xerox, if people hear that there might be a bankruptcy problem with Xerox, they're going to stop buying from Xerox. Because as we all know, printers need lots of replacement or lots of service in their life. So those kind of companies might be affected more by a bankruptcy probability. Okay, let me give you a little bit more examples on indirect cost of financial distress. So we said, of course, it's very difficult to correctly measure the cost of bankruptcy. With direct costs, it's easy. How much money you pay to legal and professional services, it's easy. For indirect costs, it's more difficult. But let's look at a couple of things. We said, for instance, for distressed airlines, for instance, there's loss of customers, which is huge cost of financial distress. Loss of suppliers, that's a very interesting case. When Swiss Air was in trouble, the gas suppliers refused to give gas to Swiss Air. So you can think how much a problem it was for Swiss Air, for instance. Another thing is you lose your employees. Which company it was? One of the companies, maybe I wrote it here. Gas and Electric Corporation. Okay. So Gas and Electric Corporation implemented a retention program costing over $80 million to retain 17 of their 17 of their employees. Okay. What was the next slide? Do you remember?
84.
Huh? 84. Oh, it doesn't go to 84. Okay. Or what is the next thing it says after loss of employees?
Loss of receivables.
Oh, loss of receipt. That's also another thing. I think it happened with Enron. Does it say Enron next to it? Okay. So when Enron was in trouble, all the small suppliers of Enron, they said, we're not paying our debt to you, or to Enron, because they're already in trouble. They're not going to come after us. So again, like it's just not helping the bankrupt firm, right? That was the case we see. The next one. Oh, here. Okay, fire sale of assets. Studies show that firms in distress sell their aircraft 15 to 40% cheaper. So when you find an airline going bankruptcy, we should buy their planes. So maybe we can collect money here in this class and buy a plane. Maybe it can happen. Okay, so that's another problem. Another one is inefficient liquidation. When a company is in bankrupt, they lose more than their value. Like Eastern Airlines, for instance, it lost more than 50% of its value during bankruptcy. It's like fire sale of assets. Like when you're buying houses, for instance, if you hear that somebody's in trouble, you think that they're going to sell their house at a lower rate. So what we're doing is really bad, but we're hoping for people in financial problems so we can buy their stuff. In bankruptcy, of course, companies will lose their value. They need the money really, really badly. The other one is cost to creditors. like in Lehman went bankrupt, and it also created a problem for the creditors because creditors to Lehman were also affected by this bankruptcy because they gave lots of money to Lehman, they couldn't get their money. Then it was like a domino effect, they were in trouble as well. So that's another thing. So it is, in general, it's estimated that the potential loss due to financial distress is around 10 to 20% of the firm value. So lots of value is lost because of the indirect cost as well. Okay. What are the implications of those bankruptcy costs about optimal capital structure? So some kind of companies should have more and some kind of companies should have less debt when we talk about this. So if a company has lots of volatile cash flows, then those companies should have less debt because they have more bankruptcy probability. Like technology and biotech firms, they have very volatile cash flows, so they should have less debt. And we're going to see whether this is really the case in real world in the second part of the class. A firm can have more debt if its cash flow is enough to match the debt. So if level of cash flows, if you have enough cash flows, you can have more debt. Some firms are protected by an external entity. They will tend to go bankrupt more. When I prepared this, I was in US, I think this was 2007, and it was before the bankruptcy, the huge bankruptcy case. But like banks are protected by FDIC, and Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they are also protected by, like these are like federal government cases. So those kind of institutions have lots of debt because they have protection. But you see when they have lots of debt, when we have crisis, the economic system might be affected more. We also experience that. So those kind of companies should have more debt. If companies have lots of illiquid assets, then they have less debt. Give me an example of illiquid assets.
Patents.
Patents, exactly. So if a company has lots of R&D, do you think it should have less or more debt? It should have less debt. And of course, companies with lots of R&D, they are riskier companies as well. So because of that, they should also have less debt. How about real estate companies? Can they have lots of debt, small debts? Lots of debt because they have huge assets. Exactly. Okay, and this is something we talked about before. Firms producing assets requiring long-term service and support tend to have less debt because when they're close to bankruptcy, the cost of bankruptcy will be very, very high for them. Okay, so when we talk about bankruptcy costs, we are focusing on probability of bankruptcy, and we are talking about cost of bankruptcy. And all those things will affect our capital structure a lot because we know that high debt means high probability of bankruptcy. So what's going to happen to our, do you remember? We're going back to M&M prepositions. What's going to happen to our prepositions? It's going to look like this. So this first part, just close all those things. This was no tax, no bankruptcy case. Then we included tax to the picture, and we were able to increase the value of the company by the present value of the tax shield. Now we have something problematic. We have bankruptcy, so we need to deduct the present value of expected bankruptcy cost from it. So now what we see the trade-off of using a lot of debt. So the good thing is tax savings. The bad thing is bankruptcy. So what we're gonna have, let me just show it and then go back to the slide. So for the optimal debt to equity ratio, what we are trying to do is we are trying to find the point where value is maximized, and value is maximized here. So first, as you increase debt more and more, the value of the firm will increase. You're going to hit the optimal, but then the bankruptcy cost of debt will outweigh the tax benefits. So the value of the firm will start to decrease. So this is actually the summary picture of trade-off theory. Okay? You use debt as tax savings is more than the bankruptcy cost, and then you should stop there. I'm saying this as if it's a very easy thing. It's not, and we're going to talk about evidence. When we think about WACC, what are we going to have? WACC will decrease as you increase debt to equity ratio, but then because of the bankruptcy probability, WACC will increase. So the same idea, right? They're the mirror images of each other anyway. So that's the Modigliani and Miller case when we have taxes and bankruptcy. So if you're interested in beta, what's going to happen to beta is, you probably remember the beta from the previous slides. The only thing we add is here. So here we have the expected present value of bankruptcy. I'm not going to focus on this because I don't think we're going to use it at all. But just for I don't know, familiarity, I put it here. So as long as you have a positive asset beta, equity beta will increase in leverage. And it will decrease in the tax rate, as you can see from the formula. And it's going to increase in the present value of bankruptcy, which is actually very common sense, everything we say. So what's going to happen is, going back to Modigliani-Miller, the pi will be there. We are going to have some slice going to equity holders, some to debt holders. L is for lawyers, bankruptcy lawyers and stuff. G is for the government. So it's still, according to Modigliani-Miller, they say that as long as the pi is the same, your capital structure will not be affected by anything. Okay, so we are finally done with Modigliani-Miller. Even in the most realistic case of M&M, where we had both taxes and bankruptcy, we saw that there should be a target optimal debt to equity ratio that the companies should go towards. And that optimal happens where present value of tax shield outweighs the cost of bankruptcy. And the companies should stop there. Do companies do that? It's another thing we're going to talk about when we talk about evidence from real world. But hopefully they're using it, because we spent like 2.5 weeks almost talking about capital structure theories. Hopefully it's going to help us with the real world cases. So let's stop here and let's take a break. And in 10 minutes, we're going to start the next section.